Hello, everyone. Welcome to the studios of WGCU Public Media in Fort Myers, Florida. My name is Mike Canary. I'm a radio producer and host here at WGCU. I'm joined today by Dr. Anna Pushkin-Shevlin. She's Regional Director of Growing Climate Solutions, Path to Positive Southwest Florida. Welcome, Dr. Pushkin-Shevlin.
Thank you so much for having me.
And also with us today is Tom Bayless. He's Senior Environmental Reporter here at WGCU. Hello there, Tom.
Hi.
We're here today primarily to look at a couple different issues that affect the work being done to address climate change, both in terms of slowing its progress and mitigating its current and future impacts. We're going to do this through the lens of the results of a survey conducted earlier this year called the 2022 Climate Metrics Survey of Southwest Florida. It's a follow-up to a similar poll conducted back in 2018 by Growing Climate Solutions. They're a coalition of environmental advocates, organizations, and other stakeholders here in Southwest Florida who are working to inform and prepare the community for impacts caused by climate change. The survey collected information on Southwest Floridians' attitudes about global warming, and the main takeaway is that most residents do believe climate change is real, that it is happening now, and that its impacts will be felt by future generations. But the poll found pretty stark differences in opinions when it came to political identification, especially around whether climate change is being caused or driven by human activity, and whether addressing it should be prioritized over economic progress. So we're going to get into those questions today. So Anna, let's start with you. For starters, just tell us a bit more about Growing Climate Solutions and the Path to Positive Southwest Florida.
Well, thank you. Growing Climate Solutions is a partnership between Florida Gulf Coast University, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, and the two community foundations, the Collier Community Foundation and Collaboratory. They came together in around 2018, 2019, and conducted a survey of climate beliefs in this area post-Hurricane Irma. And the data that came back was that there was quite a bit of misunderstanding about climate change and a lack of awareness of the challenges that our region will face and what can be done about it. So they created the Growing Climate Solutions organization, or the initiative, and I came on board in 2019. And the goal was to go out into the community and educate people about climate challenges and what can be done and how they can get engaged both in living a more sustainable lifestyle and putting in place policies and policymakers that are going to address these challenges.
So the 2022 survey, pretty much the same as the 2018 survey?
I would say it's very, very similar. We did change a couple of questions from 2018 to 2022 because in the original survey, some of the questions were related to impacts of Hurricane Irma and how that changed our perception. 4 years out, those didn't seem as relevant, but we've also learned some information over the past few years by talking to folks in our community and wanted to explore some of the subtle differences there. So we added a couple of questions or replaced the Irma questions. But in general, the questions stayed pretty much identical on most of them, and we could say they're apples to apples.
So as I mentioned in the intro, overall, most people, a majority of people polled said that climate change is happening, but it's a lower number by about 20% overall than 2018. So was that a surprise to you, and what do you think is to account that?
We were a bit surprised that the numbers went down, and we've tried to look for an explanation for that. It could be the way the poll was administered or just randomly the kind of people that picked up and answered it. We've also looked at the time that the poll was done. We polled people in April of 22, and that was about a month and a half into the war in Ukraine with rising gas prices. It was post-COVID, and COVID could have something to do with it. But we also feel that the country has become increasingly polarized, and people have fallen into two camps, and that message has been reinforced. So what we're seeing are perhaps a change where some of the not sure, or I wasn't on one side of the fence on this on the other, they've gone into two separate camps, and the climate negating group has gotten a larger share. We've seen a demographic shift toward that.
And what's interesting is that even though a majority of people do believe that it's happening, there's really stark differences in terms of, Republicans say that it's happening, but it's natural rather, and Democrats say that it's happening, but that it's man-made. And that's got to be a challenge when addressing people, that they fall into these two, they think it's happening, and to some degree they want something to be done, but they have radically different views on why it's happening. How does that affect the work that you do with growing climate solutions?
It is a challenge, and it does affect the work that we do with growing climate solutions. We know that even from the onset, we were speaking to a demographic population here, a segment of the population that tends to be more conservative and more right-leaning.
Here in Southwest Florida.
In Southwest Florida. So Growing Climate Solutions was already created, and we talk to points that are trying to engage that audience in a positive way. But it has become more challenging. It's not the issue of whether it's natural or not. I think a lot of it boils down to the fact that people don't, in this corner of Southwest Florida, there is a very strong support for the market economy and an anti-regulation and an anti-government bias. They don't want to hamper a free economy that with regulation or taxes or things that are going to constrain that. And so knowing that that is one of their priorities, you don't start to talk to people about, well, we have to do something about global warming and tax carbon, and that's a non-starter. We have to turn the discussion on things that they believe in and how it engages the climate subject in a positive way. So we will reframe that discussion and say that if we address climate, we will become more competitive. Our economy will be more competitive against foreign economies. We will increase job prospects, and we will increase technological and R&D research. And those issues play much better to this audience, and then you can actually start a constructive dialogue.
Tom, what about you as an environmental reporter? When people fall into those two different buckets, how do you address that in terms of your reporting?
I think Anna made very good points. When I first read the survey, the thing that jumped out at me was less about the questions, or should I say the answers, about whether climate change is real, but what jumped out was the fracturing of, it demonstrated the fracturing of society that we're seeing now along socioeconomic and political lines, and it made its way into the survey. And while I'm reporting, because we want to make sure that we don't alienate anybody, especially at the top of a story, we want to go ahead and inform. That's what we're here for, and being a national public radio station, we absolutely, our demographic is 50-50. We are right down the middle, and we're known for that. And the survey even mentioned that it's one of the more trusted news sources, and we want to live up to that. And that's people like me doing the reporting. So I want to make sure that I address the economic issues that are important to some people, that I do not in any way convey that it's wrong to think that way or right to think that way, to just acknowledge it and put it out there and hopefully let the readers talk among themselves, or the viewers, and have it be something, because we write about this all the time, various aspects of it. Have it be something that's out there in a way that, for example, Republicans and Democrats could talk about it without the politics getting in. It's a very delicate way to have to write a story.
Go ahead.
I also think that what the question that you asked is, does the fact that different groups believe in the cause being different, natural versus man-made, really fuel the discussion? And yes, that is a point of contention. But one way to address that is to say, irrespective of what causes it, these impacts are being felt. And so we can put the reason aside, but we have to address this because this is going to impact us, and it's going to harm our economy and our quality of life. So you can start with, what are we going to do to address it? How are we going to adapt so that we don't get whacked? And everybody wants that. Nobody wants to see distress. Nobody wants to see things close down. Nobody wants to see property values go down. So we can start with a lot of common things and skirt the issue of cause if that's going to become a wedge. Don't drive the wedge. Look for commonalities and the path forward, and that works.
One of the other interesting things that came out of this was the connection between concern over climate change and age. Among men under 50, there was a 40% drop in concern over climate change from 2018 to 2022, from 79 to 39. And among women under 50, there was a 21% drop. Why do you think fewer young people, because that's counterintuitive to me, it seems like the younger generation would be maybe more in tune with what's going on. Is it cynicism? Is it people fearing that it's just too late, so why even worry about it? I mean, what do you account that for?
Do you want me to tackle that?
That's a tough one.
No, well, okay. The first thing that you said is that it's counterintuitive, and you're right. It is somewhat counterintuitive. I think in part the survey looked at people over the age of 18, so we did not poll teenagers,
Okay.
and teenagers are some of the people that are on the active front, trying to save the planet for us. The other issue I think that becomes germane here is what happened in COVID, and whether there is a generation of people that feel that it is not the responsibility of government to protect you or to tell you what to do, and what are they doing for me? They're not helping me, so I have no responsibility to spend my tax dollars helping everybody else. There's this kind of fierce be on your own, be responsible for your own destiny, and we're going to be just fine, and younger people feel that way. Older adults have seen a time where government was more functional at the federal level. There was more belief and trust. They lived through the 70s where they cleaned up the Cayuga River. They saw how the EPA was effective. They've seen roadways be built and infrastructure, and so they have a different perception of the ability of large government institutions and agencies to tackle problems. And the dialogue has changed in years in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's more cynicism, and so that younger generation doesn't necessarily believe that the government is efficient. They see waste and bureaucracy, and that's laden to their perspective, and their attitude is, well, I'm not going to do anything foolish, and I'm not responsible for telling other people, and don't spend my money fixing their ignorance. There's a kind of be independent and don't rely on others.
Tom, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, whether it's the under 50 crowd or the Democratic or Republican demographic, one way that I've learned to get these stories across and get them read is to try to avoid using the term climate change. It is a turnoff to a lot of segments that we're talking about right now, and instead use facts that are indisputable that are a result of that. For example, that nighttime temperatures are not falling as low as they have, which affects things like crops, what you're going to pay for blueberries, and things that are really concrete. And I try to put that stuff in the reporting and talk about the overall temperature of the ocean rising and how that's led to hurricanes and how that damages your house or your car or your apartment. And those kind of examples bring it home to all the people that may or may not believe in climate change and may or may not want it solved with their tax dollars, when they know that they're going to pay more at the grocery store, or they're going to potentially be at risk because of flooding or those types of examples. That seems to be a really effective way to write stories and get it across to all ages that are willing to hear it. Sometimes people just are not going to. I don't know if it's the ostrich effect and they want to bury their head in the sand and just not deal with it because it's such a huge issue. I think most people, and the feedback I get from stories is that they are concerned about this, and Anna's right. It doesn't matter so much what your ideology is. Everyone, whether it's caused by man or not, everyone basically accepts that there's some stuff going on here, and we got to do something. It's just what and how.
Let's pivot just a little bit. We've already touched on this a couple different ways, but these are relatively tough economic times. Energy costs are pretty high. Inflation is as high as it's been since the 80s. Housing costs are high. It's just tough economic times. And when it comes to especially energy costs, when you look at mitigating climate change, there are energy costs associated with it. How do you get people to be serious about this issue during economic times like this, when they, or collectively we, may have to take an economic hit?
I think that the tough economic times make it harder to focus on the future, and that people do perceive this issue as a future issue. So, hey, right now my pocketbook's hurting and gas prices were high. I'm glad to see them coming down. It is hard to turn people's attention to something that they don't perceive happening today. They'd rather kick the can down the road. But I think that one way to turn that issue is to say that in terms of energy costs, if we were to invest in the technologies and if we were to put solar on the roof, we are actually improving the prospects of getting our economy energy independence. Well, one way to energy independence is making solar energy more accessible and putting it on your roof. And I don't appreciate the sound bites where we have drill baby drill and think that is going to solve our climate issues. Like, forget climate, drill now. The price of fuel and energy is much more complicated than just producing it at home. It's part of a world market, and those sound bites don't address the complexity of where those prices are coming from. But truly, the way toward energy independence is to invest in technologies and create more solar, more nuclear energy, which came out in this survey as a transition or a potential way to address this, and that addressing climate change can be an economic boon or lead to prosperity, lead to new jobs, new kinds of infrastructure, new ways to put people to work, new technologies that we can export to the rest of the world. The moonshot is the example that we often use. The technology that was used or developed to get us to the moon fed a generation of prosperity and R&D and computers, and the same thing can happen with the climate issue. Sequestration, high efficiencies, electric vehicles, battery technology, all of that can really bring prosperity for the long term. It takes a while, but we have to invest in that.
Tom, as an environmental reporter, do you try to find stories that will explore this idea that, taking seriously climate change, while it might seem to be an economic detriment, might be an economic benefit?
I approach the reporting in from all directions, because that is the way to get the dialogue going. And certain stories are going to have that aspect, and other ones are going to come at it in a different direction, because just like in general environmental reporting, it's one of the greatest beats, because almost everything has roots that end up in the environment. And with climate change, it affects all aspects of your life, and if it hasn't already, it's going to, in certain ways, affect everybody. And so the stories that I choose to do want some reaction to what is happening. Something occurred and it has to do with warming oceans or whatever. Other ones are explainer type stories, and I try to make sure that I am able to touch on those issues, and then other ones and make a full plate over time for people to be able to discuss and think about these things.
I think that one effective technique for getting people to take this issue seriously and to engage in a more positive way is storytelling. A lot of these numbers can be kind of abstract. We're going to experience 8 inches of sea level rise in the next year, or in the next 10 years or 20 years. And that seems kind of like, well, yeah, that might happen or it might not happen. How do you know it's going to happen? Well, it's not going to happen here. And instead, I can explain that last year was my in-laws' 60th wedding anniversary, and we were taking them out to a restaurant on the water to celebrate. And we had a reservation, and we picked them up, and they're in their 90s, and we drove down the road, and we couldn't get to the restaurant because it was October and it was a king tide, and the entire parking lot of the restaurant was a foot underwater. The intercoastal had just come up over the parking lot, and we couldn't even get down the street because it had spilled over into the street. And we had to change the reservation, and the people in the back, my in-laws in the back seat, were like, I've never seen this before. We've lived here for many years. What's going on? Did something break? And I'm like, no, that's the impact of climate change. And when people hear you tell a story that impacted you personally, that makes people believe. Same thing with somebody who ended up having Zika and being hospitalized. I mean, we don't talk a lot about Zika. It was a couple of years ago. But I interviewed somebody who was, and they told me about the fear that they didn't know exactly what the disease was. They had no experience with it at first. But they were hospitalized, and how scary that was. That makes it real. That's not a number. That's somebody in your community. And so those pieces, those storytelling techniques are actually a very important way to convey the immediacy of this.
That's probably something that resonates with you, Tom, as a reporter.
Absolutely agree. To be able to speak to people about stuff that's happening to them is a very strong technique in storytelling, and having the time and the unlimited space that an online form has, like our website, and then being able to do it in other formats on the radio or on TV, allows any particular message to get out to so many different people that it's important to use those examples. Here, this is, for example, why the 9 million people that rely on the Everglades for drinking water are going to have a problem soon, because with sea level rise, right about when they get the Everglades work done, sea level rise is going to inundate the area that they use to get the drinking water. Well, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? What are we doing now? How are we getting our water today that we could switch over to from lower aquifer or something like that? And if you stay away from, again, the term climate change and just talk about the actual things that are occurring, those are the storytelling techniques that are much more effective, and the feedback comes back very positive that way. You don't lose a lot of readers that way, and that's important.
Anna, what are, we're going to wrap up here in a little bit. What are the main things that people do agree on in terms of what we can do to either slow the progress or mitigate the impacts of climate change?
That is a great segue into what I would like to conclude, is that while people may disagree on the cause, we found a very strong support for investing in renewable energy and clean energy. In fact, one of the belief value questions that we asked is, do you have the right to clean water? And overwhelmingly, 90% or more of people said that residents have a right to clean water. They have a right to clean air. They want to see investments in the grid, in modernizing the electrical grid. They want to see investments in renewable clean energy. They support, by and large, subsidies, tax subsidies to move our ourselves toward a cleaner energy economy. They support investment in R&D. They support taxing polluters or charging a fee to polluters. And the irony comes that they want to see the private market move forward. They know that these incentives, these carrots, help us get there, but they're very cynical about the government being able to help, and they don't quite see that, well, you don't get the subsidies unless you have the government put that in place. I think we need to do some education on social studies. How does the economy really work? How do these mechanisms work? Perhaps that's why there's the cynicism, because we live in a world of sound bites where it's really easy to blame other factors, but you want to see clean energy, you support clean energy, but you don't support the government helping you, but you support the subsidy. Well, how is that subsidy getting created? So there is some positive news there. I think there's also a strong belief in conserving the natural environment. People truly appreciate the beauty of nature, and they don't like to see nature destroyed. And nature is our best protector against climate change. Preserving open spaces, planting trees, preserving mangroves, saving wetlands, restoring wetlands. These are all really good defenses against climate change. And so you start to talk to people about the solutions, aside from the technology piece, you can go to those conservation approaches and really get buy-in, because people want to see the birds, the flora, the fauna. They want to see the clean water. They don't like to see that ecosystem destroyed. And when they learn that that actually helps us move ourselves forward on climate, you can get a lot of consensus behind that. So when we're talking about solutions, especially to an audience that's a little adverse, I talk a lot about conserving land, conserving mangroves, conserving wetlands, replanting areas that have been defoliated. Tree planting projects are super popular. People feel very good. It's very tangible. You can teach the benefit of trees, not only that they sequester carbon, but that they slow the rain, they clean it, they provide shade. And once people have touched the tree and put it in the ground, and they take pride in that, you have an avenue for the next step.
Tom, I'm going to give you the last word here. You know, we live in very partisan times. I was reminded while you were talking of when we had the really bad algae blooms. We had the cyanobacteria in the river and in the lake, and then we had the red tide offshore. And this was back in 2017, 2018. And it was like one of the only issues that I saw that was a bipartisan issue here in Southwest Florida. So the environment can be a place of coming together. But the climate change issue is a little bit beyond that. But, you know, do you see that as the environment in Southwest Florida as being maybe the most bipartisan issue we've got?
And in many ways it is. And I think it's important for people to remember that reporters, my beat is the environment. That doesn't mean I'm an environmentalist. I'm not an activist like Anna is. It is something that I look at in a objective point of view, and something like the red tide and the cyanobacteria, that is, and that while they're naturally occurring, they last longer and they are stronger. It's been proven with some recent studies because of mankind's help. Using too much fertilizer. Also with the warming oceans, and in that way, whether it's the red tide event or it's pollution coming down Caloosahatchee, almost everything these days has its roots in a warming planet or in changing weather patterns. And staying away from the term climate change, almost every story that you write as an environmental reporter can have an aspect of what climate change is bringing to our society. And I try to make sure to point that out with every chance that I get, because it is the important issue. Because whether or not you want to believe it's happening, or why you believe it's happening, or if you think we should take care of the economy first or not, the changing planet is going to churn on, and it's going to continue, and you can decide not to do something about it, or you can decide to do something about it. And my job is to let people know, here's what's occurring right now, here's what's going to occur, and here's what you can do about it. Not everybody can afford, a new Tesla and solar panels on their roofs. It's great when you can, but what can those people do that is something that makes them a honest, effective change? All those things we try to put in stories from the perspective of both sides, or all three sides, as the case may be in certain situations. Reporting about global warming is a challenge, and this survey really fleshed out some of the reasons why. I think it's an excellent snapshot into not just Southwest Florida, but the nation as a whole. And I think that the work that Anna's group is doing is invaluable, and I applaud it.
I said I was going to give Tom the last word, but Anna, I'm going to give you final thoughts. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, first I want to thank you for this opportunity, and also thank people like Tom, because I started in this field, let's say in 2003, 2004, post-Hurricane Francis and Jean and Charlie and Ivan. And at that time, the word climate change was just in academic circles. People were writing and researching, but it wasn't in the popular lexicon at all. And the word global warming started to come up, and that was the taboo word. We were told never to use the word global warming. We can talk about climate change, Now climate change has been weaponized, and we talk about changes in the climate. Ultimately, I don't see myself as the activist. I see myself as an educator. I think that the most important thing we can do is educate ourselves and educate others and talk about it civilly to each other. We tell people that aside from you can't drive a Tesla and you may not put solar panels, I tell people to go on an energy diet. The way we watch our own weight and calories. Think about all the decisions you make every day and how much energy was used to create that product or do that thing, and make decisions that reduce your energy consumption. Chill, right? And if you can't do that, talk to people about climate change. Listen to them. Respond. Educate yourself, because they'll trust you more than they'll trust Tom and I. Those personal connections matter. So what we encourage people to do is arm yourself with a good amount of information, and then talk to people that are uncomfortable about it in the nicest way possible. Because the more we talk about it, the more we de-escalate the polarization, the more common ground we find, and that's the way forward.
And I have to agree with that in the reporting aspect. It is so important for an NPR station like WGCU to have an environmental reporter who has a focus on the phenomena that Anna was just discussing, and approaching it pretty much that exact same way. And thankfully to our donors and the people that make this position available, they realize the significance of this issue and allow us to spread that message, things just like what Anna was saying. And that is an important, very important role in society today. And I'm humbled and proud to be able to be that person here to do that.
All right. Well, thanks. Tom Bayless is a senior environmental reporter here at WGCU. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And Dr. Anna Pushkin-Shevlin is Regional Director of Growing Climate Solutions, Path to Positive Southwest Florida. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to everybody who was with us today.